6 on the agenda, presentation and update on the COMLEX USA Level 2 Performance Evaluation Exam and Alternative Pathways as presented by the National Board of Osteopathic Medical Examiners.
Thank you, Dr. Buhari. My name is John Gimple, Dr. Gimple from the NBOME, and are you all going to share the slides, or would you like us to do that?
This is the moderator. Give me one moment. I will get them up in just a second.
Wonderful. And
there we
thank
go.
you. And we appreciate the opportunity to give the Osteopathic Medical Board of California an update and also to get your input on some very important issues. And Mr. Doug Murray, who's the General Counsel for the NBOME, is here with me. And my name is John Gimple, and I am an osteopathic family physician and president and CEO of the NBOME. Joining us earlier, but she had to log off to get on to attend to some other matters, is Dr. Geraldine O'Shea, who many of you know, a former president of your Osteopathic Medical Board there in California, a former president of the American Association of Osteopathic Examiners, and also the chair of our NBOME Board of Directors. She's a practicing osteopathic internist in Jackson, California. In fact, we're seeing patients this morning, and she sends her regards and also her thanks for this update. Just to check in with the chair and the moderator, we are under the expectation of providing about a 15-minute session for updates and also getting input. Is that correct?
Sure, that would be fine.
Great. Just wanted to make sure that was consistent with your expectations. And again, if you would advance to the next slide, I'll let you know a little about myself. I still get to spend 1/2 day a week in a residency program. I do that on Wednesdays, so yesterday. Other than that, my 80-hour work week is with your national board. And it's been a real pleasure to be in this position for about 13 years now. And I do know a couple of you and haven't had the pleasure to meet all of you yet. So hopefully when the world settles down a bit, we'll have a chance to come visit you in person or see you out at the annual meetings of the Federation of State Medical Boards or the AAOE meetings. Hopefully a representative of this board has also attended some of the recent FSMB webinar updates as well as the AAOE meetings. So some of this may be a bit repetitive for you all. But just as a reminder, your national board, the NBOME, has been around since 1934. And it was actually founded by the American Osteopathic Association at a time when the profession said, well, if we're going to be our own distinctive profession and get the rights to practice in every state and territory, if you will, across the nation and beyond, we're going to have our own self-regulation. And that self-regulation is going to include having to accredit schools, having standards, having our own licensure exams, and designing the assessments that are valid for the practice of osteopathic medicine. And in fact, to this day, the reason there is a COMLEX USA required for licensure like in California, that exam is continually updated to make sure it keeps up with the evolving practice of osteopathic medicine, demonstrated by lots of evidence for its validity and of course its reliability, its fairness, and defensibility for the practice of osteopathic medicine. We believe that's why you entrust it as part of what you evaluate for licensee candidates in your wonderful state. And there's lots of information, including all of the details of the COMLEX USA blueprint, the osteopathic design, around 7 competency domains and 10 categories of clinical presentations that I have a hard copy of in front of me, but it's all on our website, very transparent for what is on the test. So if you're interested, I would invite you to visit our website, and you can look at some of the continuous quality improvement processes that are put into place that have been lauded by the Journal of Medical Regulation, the Federation of State Medical Boards, and others. Pardon my allergies. The tree pollens out here on the East Coast are going crazy today. So our mission is to protect the public. Just like you, we speak the same language in terms of it's a hard job, right, sometimes, but our job is to make sure what's in the best interest of the patients, and our assessments are set at a minimal competency standard, but making sure that everybody who is ultimately given the license to practice, for example, by a board such as yours, in California has demonstrated their minimal competency for the practice of osteopathic medicine. That's what it's all about for us. That's what it's all about for you all. And so again, we kind of speak the same language. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's a language that others don't fully understand. But regulation and protecting the public sometimes can be a challenge from especially in the era of a pandemic, as we all learned over the last year. Next slide. So we wanted to particularly provide some updates on assessment through the pandemic and assure you that your testing in the computer-based side of COMLEX has continued, give you just a few details, but really get your input after we show you where we're going with the clinical skills competency assessments, the level 2P and such, as you advertised in your introduction. So the next slide talks a little bit about lots of agility that had to be put in place to make sure in the throes of the quarantine last March, April, and May that we could study our assessments and make sure that we could bring them back up when they were safe to take. The last thing we would want to have is a student going to take a licensure exam and then getting ill because they were doing that. Then we don't have a doctor a couple years from now, as well as other problems with that scenario. So we worked with Prometric, who is our partner in delivering the computer-based tests, after a couple-month hiatus, to bring those exams back up and to make sure that the test taking was going to be safe. We also put up a couple of satellite centers at universities, just in case those centers wouldn't open. And we don't need to explain to you all of the complexities of the quarantine and the state quarantining with travel and all of the issues related to the pandemic. However, the good news is with over 30,000 candidates tested since May of last year in COMLEX, that's level 1, level 2 CE, and level 3, we were able to provide that safely with physical distancing, with face masks required. We did not have one single case of COVID disease or contact traced COVID positive disease or a test related to any DO students or residents taking a COMLEX exam. We also didn't have any case where a student needed an exam and couldn't get it eventually. They may have had to wait a couple of weeks, they may have had to wait a couple of months, but hopefully you've not had any cases of residents or graduates from residencies coming to you saying, hey, I'm ready to get my license, but I've not been able to take my COMLEX level 3, because we have had this widespread availability, especially over the last 6 months. So this was a lot of work. This was a lot of 12-hour days on our staff and people at the colleges, and working with candidates and residency programs as well, to make sure that there was no test taker left behind and everybody got a safe opportunity to take, or if needed, retake their assessment to demonstrate their competency and finish taking COMLEX. So next slide. So the level 2 PE exam, the performance evaluation component, that's our clinical skills exam. And you know, in California, because I know the history, you all used to have an oral practical or OMT performance exam that you gave as well. But since 2004, the standard in the land has really been demonstrating competencies for fundamental osteopathic clinical skills via a national standardized exam we call level 2 PE as part of the COMLEX pathway. Unfortunately, we had to also suspend that exam in the quarantine, and then we continued that suspension throughout last summer and last fall and into the early part of this year, with the hope that we would be able to resume testing early, maybe April or June of this year. Unfortunately, due to the continuing pandemic circumstances and lots of other political and other circumstances across the profession and our world, we announced that we have indefinitely suspended this exam. We announced in end of January, beginning of February, that we were putting together a special commission on osteopathic medical licensure assessment. And that was going to include representatives from the licensure community, like AAOE, and representatives from the educator side, like colleges of osteopathic medicine, deans, and GME program directors, osteopathic physicians in practice, and of course, public members, patient advocates, and students as well. We included osteopathic medical students, just to mention a couple of the groups that were included on this 19 person panel. This group has been working extremely hard since February on addressing both what about the needs of the class of 2021, the current graduates, and then what about the needs of the next couple of classes, if in fact the level 2 PE exam remains suspended. We incorporated lots of stakeholder surveys. We reached out to you all and all of the other boards. We presented and got input from AAOE and from the Federation of State Medical Boards, from the licensure community, to make sure that we were taking your input as to what your needs, what your concerns, and what your ideas were. And we continue that work. We received, about 6,000 individual survey respondents, and also well over 20 position statements from organizations such as the Osteopathic Medical Board of California and other groups weighing in on these important issues and opportunities. Next slide. These were the groups that actually were included in the invitation list to be actually on the commission. We currently have one public member. We currently have 2 DO student members, and you can see the organizations that were invited and are participating in the current work of the commission. The commission's work was really designed to deal with the acute and pressing issues of the graduating class this year, since there is no PE for them to take for the most part. About 25% of the graduating class this year had already satisfied the requirement of passing PE, but that meant for 75%, about 5,000 students in the graduating class, they were not able to take a level 2 PE because of the suspension. So if you go to the next slide, we'll describe the phases of the commission's work. And again, we are really still looking for input from organizations and individuals on organizations such as the Osteopathic Medical Board of California. The first phase of the work just concluded recently, and that phase was getting all this feedback and doing a pretty thorough analysis to come up with a pathway for eligibility for level 3 that would still satisfy the need for a defensible way that these students, these graduates, could demonstrate their fundamental skills, but yet not require them to travel to one of our 2 national centers to take the exam. And by the way, we were planning on bringing up a center in California as a 3rd temporary site throughout the year to make up the backlog once we reopened in April. However, when we decided to indefinitely suspend, that of course went by the wayside as well. In addition, we knew that the commission needed to make recommendations for pathways for the next graduating class, who are lining up to graduate next May or June, and they want to know what they're going to need to do to be able to ultimately take their level 3 and ultimately get a license in California or whatever state they desire. So we'll tell you a little bit about those. Next slide. The second phase is really going to continue through April of next year, where the commission, not completely dissimilar from a group we called our Blue Ribbon Panel on Enhancing COMLEX, would look at the whole of COMLEX, making sure that COMLEX remains that gold standard assessment for osteopathic physician licensure, and looking at both clinical skills assessment, competency assessment, but some of the changes in the practice of osteopathic medicine, things like telemedicine, things like COVID content, COVID-19 presentations and diagnosis and treatment, but also some important social imperatives, such as systemic racism and how that could be propagated, if you will, in the current medical education structure and potentially even in the way things are assessed or testing. So are there ways that we can make a difference to reduce or hopefully one day eliminate any of these racial injustices or other social injustices? So we have some very lofty goals in terms of what the commission is working on over this next year. Now, truth be known, we already have existing processes for continuous blueprint review. We've been lauded for that by the Federation of State Medical Boards. You can read it in their journal. We already had blueprint committees and committees that were looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. We already have testing committees that, were exploring telemedicine competencies and other things that might eventually become something that we would need to test. But this brings it all up under one umbrella, keeping COMLEX the gold standard. It even looks at test delivery. For example, do we envision a day coming where students would not have to travel to a bricks and mortar testing center to take certain elements of their licensure assessment? It's probably not there yet in terms of the security and some of the other issues. If you read the New York Times last weekend, you saw the interesting Dartmouth case related to security and remote proctoring and assessment. But it's something that we certainly have been studying and will continue to study, again, to keep COMLEX that gold standard. So here's what the commission has come out with in their announcements, and these are on our website. If you go to the next slide, you can see that for the class of 2021, and there's a few people in the class of 2020 who it matters, they have been given pathways. Whether they took and passed level 2 PE, well, then it's easy. They go, their dean attests that they graduated. They wait typically 6 months into residency, and then somewhere thereafter, they take their level 3, they pass it, and they come to you for a license. Of course, in California, they come to you for a license after they complete their 3 years of GME, as I understand it, which, by the way, I salute you for implementing that high standard. Pathway 2 would be if you never took a level 2 PE because you didn't get the chance. It was closed down. You'll still have a way, and in this way, we're essentially deeming the dean and the comm faculty as the trusted agent to attest that for graduation, this candidate has demonstrated fundamental osteopathic medical skills, and the schools are really doubling down. They were already preparing to do that because of the accreditation standard from COCA that was asking them to do that. In that case, we still recommend that they do 6 years of residency, 6 months of residency, and that their program director attests. This has always been a requirement for COMLEX since the new blueprint was implemented in 2018. The program director must attest that they're in good academic and professional standing in the program. But then for that class and pathway 3 here, for the those who have taken level 2 PE but perhaps were unsuccessful and failed the exam but did not get a chance to retake it, those students or graduates would also be able to have the chance to have their dean attest that they have demonstrated the fundamental competencies. The program director will also attest that they're in good academic and professional standing. And the only difference here is the student must wait at least 6 months of residency training so that we know that the program director has an ample time with their competency committee using milestones as required by all ACGME programs to look at clinical skills competencies to make sure that there's at least minimal competency there. So those were the pathways that were established. These students are not taking a test. They're not having any fee associated with taking any test other than they come and they take level 3 when it's time. Next slide. Now, most recently, the commission announced after our board approved their recommended pathways for the class of 2022. So this is the next group. You know, there's about 8,000 of them lined up for graduating next year. And in that case, we are still using attestation, but we're calling it enhanced attestation. And the commission and the board will be releasing by June 30th the details as to what that requires. It's going to have some more specifics, some more details, some more options outlined so that we can make sure that it's robust enough for this new graduating class that you will be able to trust that these candidates have demonstrated their minimal competency anyway in these fundamental osteopathic medical skills, including doctor-patient communication, hands-on physical examination, OMT and OMM, and incorporating that into encounters in both your documentation and your treatment. All of that is partly what the PE was responsible for assessing. And notice for the class of 2023, so those folks are already asking questions. That's the group that's starting their clinical rotations, God willing, this summer or soon. The commission is still continuing to explore means to assess and verify these competencies for this group, and we're looking at various programs that could include everything from a PE exam, similar to what we had before, to a program certification of COM or school-based clinical skills assessments, to virtual assessment, online assessment of certain things as part of the package. Again, these are all the things that the commission and the NBLME staff have been working on very, very hard through the pandemic to bring it up to board. So very important in our process has been, we reached out to you, the licensing boards, and other folks who involved in regulation, as well as those involved in education, and even the students themselves who certainly have a perspective on this, to get their feedback, to get their input, and to come to a consensus as to what was best for us. Our North Star is protecting the patients, protecting the public, just like you at the licensing boards. But for many of them, it was also making sure, of course, that it's a fair, defensible, of course, valid and reliable gold standard assessment. And that's what we all agree on. That's the anchor and the platform that we're all working upon. Next slide, I think, is the last slide, and it's just to remind you that we are continuing to ask groups about organizational feedback. We did receive statements. If you have not had the chance yet or would like to send something in, Mr. Ito or Dr. Bahari, please feel free at any time to send it in. The commission is meeting very regularly and continuing this work through the summer. We think they'll have a lot of their clinical skills related stuff worked out by the fall, but certainly they're going to continue working through next April to make sure COMLEX remains your trusted assessment for licensure for osteopathic physicians in California and in every other state and jurisdiction in the United States. And I'll just give you one last story, and that is the Medical Board of Australia, which you might be familiar with, and based on a recommendation from the Australian Medical Council in September of last year, 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, issued competent pathway authority to NBOME for the COMLEX exam for licensure in Australia. So for DOs who've taken COMLEX, including all of the exams in the sequence, and have done at least 2 years of accredited GME training, including AOA or ACGME accredited training, will be now eligible to go and apply with their COMLEX to get a license for unrestricted practice as a physician in Australia. Very, very exciting. This was a very extensive review, external review for validity and evidence for validity by this group. They hadn't given such status to any other country or other assessment organization in over 15 years. And they apologized because between that and, of course, the pandemic, they felt the need to really give a very thorough review. And we're very pleased to report that. And I mentioned it's another place where DOs are recognized as osteopathic physicians, but also for the complete practice of osteopathic medicine, and also with their own valid, distinct credentials, such as the DO degree and the COMLEX USA qualification. Next slide, I think it's the last. This is where we want to really turn it over to you all and see if you have any feedback, if you have any questions, if you have any insights, or if you have any concerns with our approach and with where we're going with all of this. So, Doctor?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Gimple. That's a very good, detailed presentation showing the hard work of the NBOME in endeavoring to come up with a mechanism to continue to assess clinical competency, of course, given the restrictions and challenges that we're facing today. Do any of the other board members have any questions or comments for Dr. Gimple regarding this?
Hello, this is Claudia Mercado, board member. Thank you for being here. Just curious, when you guys are doing these assessments, are you also capturing information such as the ethnic group that these physicians belong to as a data point? And then also on the last slide, you mentioned you are measuring interpersonal skills. How are you handling diversity and inclusion and lack of representation for physicians in the consultation rooms for people of color?
Okay, the issues such as race, ethnicity, I think are optional reported information that can be collected and can be studied on what the psychometricians call diff studies and other types of studies to look for psychometric bias, for example, in assessments and that type of thing. And we've certainly published on that area. In the assessments that include human raters, whether that's like the performance evaluation, the level 2 PE, which of course is currently suspended. In that assessment, the standardized patients themselves actually represent a pretty good demographic mix of the population in terms of in the exam. And the assessment of what's called doctor-patient communication skills actually incorporates cultural competency behaviors in what they're actually the raters are actually looking for on behalf of the candidates. Unfortunately, it's suspended because we're not able to use it right now in the pandemic. But it was one of those things that from the beginning, the NBOME felt was very, very important to make sure that that students are aware of cultural differences, whether it be in communication style, whether it be in preference for opting for certain medical treatments, for example, or that kind of thing. And we're not judgmental based on race, ethnicity, gender, those types of things. And while it's subtle and important we never disregarded it. We always understood that implicit bias with any human raters or anything involved human raters was important, but we actually spent lots of time in the quality assurance and training of the standardized patients to make sure that nobody was disadvantaged or advantaged based on, again, gender. Of course, something that the one difference that we continued to show, and this was true for all 17 years of the level 2 PE exam, specifically to the component of doctor-patient communication, the empathetic communication, and interpersonal skills, is that the exam does seem to be biased with respect to gender. And that is to say that women have a better chance of passing that exam and always have. And this is consistent with, of course, many studies on both doctor-patient communication and others in the profession. And of course, it doesn't matter whether your raters are women or men, older or younger, whatever. Women tended to perform better. And I think we ultimately came to the conclusion that, and don't take this the wrong way, women are better at communicating in general, as an overgeneralization. And there are certainly women who failed that domain, and there are certainly men who perform extremely well in doctor-patient communication. But that was one that we published quite a bit on, and were important parts of our continuous research agenda.
And then quick follow-up, how do you measure the ability to interact with translators? So in a situation where you have a physician that, how do they assure that the right things are being discussed back and forth? Is there any?
Great question. That was something that we explored in pilots. One of the difficulties, by the way, there are some test content, albeit it's quite small, throughout COMLEX, where the concept of working with a translator is explored. I'll give you an example. Using video clips in the level 3, the level 2 of COMLEX. We've had over the years test items that show appropriate use of a translator in a doctor-patient encounter, and inappropriate use, and have them choose which is the option is the most appropriate, for example. But in the level 2 PE exam, it was always one of those tricky things, because in order to achieve reliability, you only have a 12-station exam. To get reliability, which is really important for fairness for the candidates as well as others, it was kind of tricky to do those things that are, like a medical ethics case, or like a delivering bad news, or like working with a translator. We actually explored using that in some different pilots that we worked on. But if there was only one case like that and they failed, it was hard to get a reliable indicator that in fact they really are not good at using an interpreter, for example, in appropriate use with a patient, because you're only assessing it once. And unless you had multiple stations, maybe 6, 7, 8 stations that all used a translator, it's hard to get reliable information. And for most of you who know, the level 2 PE was a 8-hour exam, 7.5 hours as it is, with 12 stations. So if we had 6, 7 stations using a translator, right, we wouldn't have a lot of stations not using a translator, for example. So, but it was something that we were always concerned with. I think it's a great point. There were a lot of other really important scenarios that I think are important to good medical practice that I think the schools use in formative situations. The residency programs use in formative situations, and we have done our best to explore and have integrated you testing some of these concepts, specifically the one you mentioned, in the computer-based exams, and with some success. So that would be, I mentioned telemedicine as one of those not emerging competencies. It's probably here to stay as part of medical practice, but the use of translators appropriately as our communities and our culture, and the folks with English as a second language or a non-language at all become a bigger proportions of our healthcare, I think are very important for us to continue to mention. So I made a note, and we'll make sure that our testing committees continue to explore that issue.
And just quick follow-up, I don't want to take too much of our time here, but when they're, for these assessments, for example, are you also assessing like the ability to seek for help? I'm not sure if physicians have a lot of time to do telemedicine, talk to a translator, and also transcribe all of the things that were discussed. How do you assess a physician taking the time to actually transcribe what was said and done so that there's a real clear record for all patients?
Yes, actually, if you allow me to just expand for a minute or two on this issue, one of the important elements of the level 2 PE, the performance evaluation, which is currently suspended, was documentation. We felt that the documentation, and for us, it was not an EHR, but it was a typed documentation where the student had about 9 minutes after the encounter or more if they left the encounter before the 14-minute time frame to document what was going on in the encounter. And we use a SOAP note format. And the students know, and it's very clear in all of our information and all the practice tools we have on our website, that they're being evaluated on their ability to document so that other healthcare providers could read their typed communication, could understand what was going on as to the subjective, objective assessment and plan portions of their note, and that the physician raters could also look at their clinical problem solving. In other words, did they link the physical findings that they found, the history taking, that what they learned in interviewing the patient? Did they demonstrate some osteopathic thought, for example, biomechanics or body, mind, spirit throughout this approach in coming up with an integrated differential diagnosis and coming up with a reasonable and safe for the patient diagnostic and treatment plan? This was evaluated 12 times over in the level 2 PE exam by trained and certified osteopathic physician examiners from all around the country. We had several of them from California. They were scoring these notes. They had no idea who wrote them. They had no idea where the students trained. They just know the case, that they're trained on the specific case, and they were trained on the rubric and recertified every year to use this rubric. We have not published the rubric yet, but it may be published someday. But it was something that we refined over more than 20 years in both the pilot testing and ultimately the 17 years of PE testing. And we believe from a patient safety standpoint, a protect the public standpoint, and also from an osteopathic integration standpoint, that this was a really important element of the level 2 PE exam that some people have kind of missed in all of the commotion. Without the PE exam, your question might be, well, then how do you test it now? And we certainly are looking for ways to enhance that in the computer-based assessments. We've been piloting now for about 6 years. In fact, I just hung up an email conversation with the White House physician who's on our committee, who is a DO, as you know, Kevin, and we call it Pocket. But this was a research project where we actually give students a clinical scenario in a computer-based exam format, and then we actually give them access to up-to-date or to other defensible, valid sources of information. And we allow them to actually look things up in solving the question as to what's the best treatment, what's the most cost-effective or safe treatment, what are the options, what are the interactions with these medications, et cetera, and use them at the point of care or the point of solving the test item. We've been piloting these for about 7 years, and we run into some roadblocks, but we're looking at those. While they don't necessarily require documentation, like you were mentioning, they do require some elements of clinical problem solving that we believe we were assessing fairly well in the SOAP note portion of the PE. But if we don't bring back the PE, what would be other ways to go about that?
Are there any other comments from board members? All right, not seeing anything. I'll now entertain comments from the public. Moderator, is there anyone requesting to offer public comment on this agenda item?
This is the moderator. Give me one moment to get the instructions up, and I will also open up the Q&A panel. Members of the public, if you would like to make a public comment, please click that Q&A icon at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen and type, "I would like to make a public comment," and send to all panelists. Go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access the Q&A panel and submit their requests. All right, this is the moderator, and it looks like at this time there are no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
All right, Q&A panel is now closed.
Well, thank you. No one else like to comment, and I'd like to thank Dr. Gimple for that presentation.
Thank you very much. Stay well and enjoy the spring.
Thank you.
See you soon.
All right, so we'll move on to agenda item number 7, discussion, review, and possible approval of the board's final responses to the Sunset Review background paper issues. Mark?
Thank you, Dr. Bahari. This is Mark Ito, Executive Director. This is the agenda item 7. This is actually the background paper issue. So it's a different slide than we have up right now. I believe it's the agenda item right before the one we have up on the screen.
Item 6?
Yeah,
Let me just...
I think at one point it was 7, then it got pushed. It was...
Co-moderator, can we go back to slide 18? Is it showing the correct slide now?
No, that's the next agenda item. This is the final responses. It should have a memo as the front cover dated May 5th.
I apologize. Let me go ahead and switch over to the board materials. Let's see.
It's tab 6 in the board materials.
Thank you. Here we go. Is this it?
That is it. That is it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So this is our agenda item on our responses to the Sunset Hearing background paper issues. On April 9th, me and Dr. Bahari, we represented the board in front of the Joint Committee for the Sunset Review hearing. As part of that Sunset Review hearing, a background paper was issued, which included, among other things, issues and questions for the board. Attached to the memo that was sent out with the board meeting materials were the issues and the final responses that are proposed to be included in the when they're submitted to the Joint Committee. I assume you've looked over the final responses, and unless you want me to go through them individually, if you have any questions, I'll take them now. And if not, I recommend that the board moves to approve the responses as written and delegate to the executive director the authority to make technical and non-substantive changes that may be required to submit the responses to the background paper. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we can have motions at this time.
Any discussion from board members? If not, we can have a motion to approve the responses and give Mark the ability to make non-substantive changes.
Motion to approve. Motion made by Dr. Jensen.
Second.
We have a second from Laura Damian. So Machiko, can we have a roll call, please? Roll vote.
You may. Cora Damian.
Aye.
Dr. Buhari.
Aye.
Dr. Jensen.
Aye.
Claudia Mercado.
Aye.
Andrew Marino. Oh,
I apologize. This is the moderator. Do we need to go to public comment before we take roll or take votes?
Yes, we
I
do.
apologize. I think you're probably right. So, moderator, is anyone requesting public comment?
One moment while I get those instructions up. And
Thank you.
All right. Members of the public, at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. If you would like to make a public comment on this item, please click that Q&A icon at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. I'll go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access the Q&A panel and submit their requests. All right, this is the moderator. Seeing no requests for public comment, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
All right, Q&A panel is now closed.
Okay, so Machiko, let's pick up where we left off with the roll call vote.
Will do. Andrew Marino,
Yes.
Dr. Patel,
Aye.
motion moved.
Okay, the motion is carried. And we'll move on to item number 8 on the agenda, the Executive Director's Report. And I'll pass to Mark Ito.
Thank you. There you go. I think we're on the right agenda item on the screen. So this is the Executive Director's Report. I'm going to be going over licensing, staffing, regulations, exams, and I'm going to give you an update on COVID-19. And then I will pass it to Corey Sparks, one of the board's enforcement analysts, to do the enforcement report. So for licensing for the board, there's a table in the report that shows the total number of licensees at the board, which is 12,253, which are under the board's jurisdiction. The board's licensing population continues to grow, which is a good thing, and it's consistent with kind of our message that the osteopathic profession is a growing profession, and I think that is a good thing for the board. Next up in licensing, I have stats from fiscal year 2019-20, and then I have stats from 2021 through March 31st, as the fiscal year is not completed for 2021 yet. Our licensing timeline at this point for a complete application is 89 days, and applications with missing documents, which means we have to ask for the documents and kind of gather them still, is 127 days to complete and approve. That's something I'm trying to lower at this point. We do have some vacancies that we're going to be filling, and I anticipate with those vacancies, those timelines will get closer to where our benchmark processing time, which is about 60 days for complete applications. There's a chart there that shows our total number of applications we have. We just continue to get more applications. Our PTL apps are more than we anticipated when we first kind of did an analysis when that bill was going through. So we're getting more PTL apps than we anticipated. And as such, our revenue is increasing due to that as well. So I think our licensing is doing well from that standpoint. So moving on to staffing, the board has 13.4 authorized positions, with 11.4 of those positions currently filled. So we have 2 vacancies at this time. We do have a staffing update on February 16th, 2021. The board hired Beth Dutchler to be an enforcement analyst for the board. Her job is going to be to process all enforcement workload related to the new license type, the postgraduate training license we have. And currently, I'm redirecting Beth at this time to assist enforcement in opening and processing complaints. And we're already seeing those timelines go down. They're almost cut in half at this point. So that's a good thing. And the other staffing update we have is on April 9th, 2021, the board's cashier, Patrice Poe, she separated from the state. So she is no longer employed by the board. The board currently has two vacancies that are in various stages of the recruiting process. We have an SSA, a staff services analyst, opening that we are advertising for to process the osteopathic physician and surgeon applications. And we also have an office technician opening to process all the cashiering functions. So we're currently advertising for those and getting ready to interview for the SSA position coming up here. So a regulations update, we have some regulations in the process. We have our notice to consumers regulation. This regulatory proposal would require osteopathic physicians and surgeons to notify consumers of their licensure with the board, how they can check the status of a license of a DO, and also how to file a complaint. So this regulatory package was submitted to the Office of Administrative Law on December 23rd, 2020 for final approval. And I anticipate that that'll be approved within the month. We have the AB 2138 regulatory proposal. This one amends regulations consistent with the provisions of Assembly Bill 2138, which would more accurately reflect the board's authority to consider denials and discipline. This regulatory package was submitted to the Office of Administrative Law on December 2nd, 2020. I'm actually working with the Office of Administrative Law actually this afternoon. I anticipate that being approved no later than Monday. The continuing medical education regulation, this has come before the board a few times because we've had to change the language a little bit to make it consistent and provide clarity to the law. So this regulation, it creates a post-renewal audit. It makes exemptions to CME requirements, and it changes the CME reporting period to make that more clear for DOs. So at our last board meeting in January 14th of 2021, we approved text, and I am working on that proposal, and I anticipate submitting it to the department for pre-review by the end of this fiscal year. And the last reg I want to talk about is the disciplinary guidelines reg. This regulation adds specified uniform standards related to substance abuse by incorporating them by reference, and it also updates existing standards and optional terms of probation. This is one that is still in process on the board's end. So it's still in office with us, and I anticipate submitting this proposal by the end of this calendar year. So moving on, I had an examination update. MBO and me did such a great job with their presentation that I won't kind of repeat what they said, but I will kind of mention a few things. So our regs, our California Code of Regulations, section 1620, it states that a successfully completed written examination is required for all applicants, and this written examination may be subsection A, the National Board of Osteopathic Medical Examiners, parts 1, 2, and 3. I've listed out in the memo all the exams that MBO kind of already went over, so I won't kind of go over the 4 exams, but with a temporary pause in the level 2 PE exam, we are still within our regulatory authority because we are technically still having DOs complete levels 1, 2, and 3 of the examination. So I kind of wanted to make that clear. I kind of wanted to bring that up because my thing with the temporarily delay in the administration of level 2 PE is we don't want to be a barrier for licensure, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're not undermining consumer protection when it comes to our exams and what's required of our DOs. So the next topic I want to talk about is the COVID-19 update. On March 19th, the governor issued an executive order. It provided a stay-at-home order for citizens of California, except for those that are needed to maintain continuity of operations. From the get-go, board management has determined that all board staff are essential due to the nature of the profession. So we've been in the office consistently through the pandemic. However, we have set up teleworking, rotational work schedules to ensure social distancing while at the same time ensuring that operational needs are met. So on March 30th, the governor also issued an executive order which gave the director of our department the authority to waive any licensing requirements and amend scopes of practice. And the following waivers were issued, and they've kind of been updated throughout the process to ensure that we're able to meet operational needs ongoing. There was a continuing education waiver. This waiver, it temporarily exempted DOs from completing and demonstrating compliance with their continuing medical education in order to renew their license. However, the DOs must satisfy these requirements within 6 months of the waiver. And the latest waiver was issued on March 30th, 2021. So we're looking at the end of September is when we'll have to have our doctors send in their CMEs. But at the same time, my CME analyst and my licensing unit, because doctors are still sending in their CMEs, we are taking a look at them along the way just to make sure we don't have a massive backlog come September. So we're looking at as many CMEs as we can, while at the same time ensuring that these DOs licenses are renewed in time to get them back out in the workforce. Next waiver is the reinstatement of licensure. This is for inactive licensees who are seeking to reinstate their licenses. So they would not need to demonstrate compliance with CMEs or pay for any fees to reactivate their license. And these licenses were good for 6 months or when the state of emergency existed, whichever is sooner. And the last two waivers had to do with the postgraduate training license. So when the law came out, it stated that that DOs had to. I'm sorry. When you enter into a postgraduate training program, you had to get your postgraduate training license within 180 days. These two waivers, and they're only differentiated by the time that you were initially enrolled in the postgraduate training program, but it extended the date for these residents to get their postgraduate training license until June 30th of 2021. So that concludes my portion of the executive director's report. Before I send it over to Corey Sparks to give the enforcement portion, does anyone have any questions?
Hey, Mark, this is Claudia. You mentioned that something dropped by half. I think, can you just clarify that you said that was
Yeah, thanks for that question, Claudia. So we were we were over our performance measure target for our complaint intakes, which means we're supposed to be at 10 days from when a complaint comes in to when we actually open it. So that time frame was inflated much greater than that, and a lot of that had to do with the fact that we had a vacancy in our enforcement unit, and we kind of prioritized processing the complaints over shortening that opening time. But now that we have a full staff, we're able to kind of get to that, and the times have been cut in half. And I believe right now we're closer to about 15 days now, so we're getting really close to where we need to be.
great. And then also, would it maybe help when we also hear the executive director's report to also include maybe any challenges or wins that you guys have had in regards to the strategic plan that we put together as a board, to just make sure that it's always front of mind?
Yes, I'm actually writing that down now. That's a great idea, Claudia. Thanks for bringing that up. I'll make sure to add that moving forward.
Just so that, if we can give you support or we can brainstorm on how to move things forward so that we do hit those marks collectively.
Okay. Sounds like a great idea. I'll make sure to do that. All right. If there's no more questions, I will pass the report on to Corey Sparks to give the enforcement portion of the report.
All right, thank you, Mark. Hello, board members. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through the report. It should be the next picture or next page on our slide. This is a OMBC enforcement report, May 13th, 2021. Actually, no, probably the next slide. Go to the next. Keep going, keep going. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are May 13th, 2021. The following enforcement report covers a 12-month period starting from April 1st, 2020 to March 31st, 2021. The enforcement report is divided into 4 sections: intake, investigations, enforcement, and probation. And the data is collected from the DCA enforcement reports and the ad hoc reports created in the Cognos Analytics program that the DCA uses. So just to let you know a little bit about those reports, they've been updated to, the iOS or updated our reports into a new system where we're pulling these reports from. They're pretty much the same, but they're a little bit difficult to read sometimes. But again, it's the same data. Okay, starting on data table 1, we can see that during this period, we received 605 complaints. 632 of those complaints we assigned or we closed. The average day of processing was 42. And as you can see in this report, October, we assigned 156 cases, basically from intake into investigations. And October is kind of a period where we were backlogged and we all went on board and we started processing cases to get the backlog done. So you're going to see some of these numbers high in October during the complaint and desk investigation data tables. So as of the end of March, we had 59 cases pending in the intake. So that's our intake period. Below, we see pending complaints in figure 1.1. Below the data table, we see that the pending complaints dropped significantly starting on October 2020, which was a result of the board addressing the backlog of complaints during second and third quarter 2020. As you can also see, the assigned cases in October jumped quite significantly as well as we were addressing those backlogs. Okay, moving down to the center of the page under investigations, these are all internal investigations that our analysts in the board processes. Basically, for all desk investigations during this period, we had a total of 631 cases were assigned to desk investigations, 555 cases were completed, and the average number of days to complete a desk investigation was 104 days. Again, looking at October, we see that assigned was 156. It was pretty high. Aging was 133. Completed was 97. So those numbers are high because we were really focusing in on getting those cases from the intake into investigations and completing them. So looking on the next page, we can see on figure 2.1, the assigned and completed caseloads averaged around 52 and 56 per month respectively. Pending desk investigations increased from 200 to 350 from second quarter to fourth quarter of 2020 and leveled off around 300 during the first quarter 2021. And the reason why these pending cases went up during October again was because we had all those backlogs in the intake that we assigned over to investigations, so which increased our desk investigation caseload. Okay, middle of the page, division investigations, field investigations. Data table 3 above breaks down the monthly totals for cases assigned to the division investigations or sworn investigations. Completed cases are either closed with insufficient evidence or referred to the Attorney General's Office for Disciplinary Action. During this 12-month period, 34 cases were assigned to field investigations, 28 were completed, and 57 cases were pending at the end of first quarter 2021. The average number of days to complete a field investigation was 523. Now, I checked today, and our pending cases that we have currently out for field investigations is 66. So we've gone up about 10 more cases out in the field. The case complexity, moving down on the page, and you can see that pie chart, figure 3.1, the case complexity is the breakdown of the specific allegations. Figure 3.1, for all 28 completed field investigations, there were 7 excessive prescribing cases, 7 unprofessional conduct cases, 5 sexual misconduct cases, 3 criminal, 1 negligent or injury case, 3 substance abuse cases, and 2 unlicensed practice cases. So that just breaks down the types of complaints that we completed during that period for field investigations. Okay, next page, please. Okay, for data table 4, this is aging for all investigations. This includes internal investigations, desk investigations, and our field investigations. So we see the matrix for the number of all investigations that were closed per month during this period. 285 cases were completed within 90 days. 111 cases were completed between 91 and 180 days. 109 cases were completed between 181 and 365 days, or a year. 31 cases were completed between 1 to 2 years, and 17 cases were completed between 2 to 3 years. 396 or 71% of investigations were completed within 6 months. 505 or 91% were completed within a year. I think those numbers are really good. Enforcement actions, these are for all cases that we've referred over to the Attorney General's office. Data table 5 above breaks down the monthly totals for each disciplinary action. During this 12-month period, 19 cases were transmitted to the Attorney General's office for disciplinary actions. 10 accusations, statement of issues were filed. 13 final disciplinary orders were filed. 0 accusations were withdrawn. 5 cases were closed without disciplinary action. 3 citations issued. 3 suspensions order were filed. 3 suspension orders were filed. 23 AG cases were pending at the end of first quarter 2020. Okay, let's go next page, please. All right, aging for all disciplinary orders. Data table 6 and figure 6.1. We see the aging matrix of the 13 final disciplinary orders that were completed during this 12-month period. Chart displays the percentage of cases distributed within each aging period. 1 case was completed within 90 to 81 days. 1 case completed within 181 to 365 days. 2 cases within 1 to 2 years. 1 case within 2 to 3 years. 6 cases within 3 to 4 years. 2 cases after 4 years. Of the 13 disciplinary orders imposed, figure 6.2 below, there were 8 probationary orders, 1 revocation, 2 surrenders, and 2 public reprimands. Okay, next page, please. Performance measures. So during the intake, as you can see, what we've done, what I've done on this table for intake. In the past, we were measuring the threshold at 30 days, but we've been told that we've had to go to 10 days. So we started that in January. And that was due to a statute that we've had to issue out technically what the statute says, we have to issue a letter to respond to the complaint within 10 days. So they've dropped that threshold to 10. So this is where we've had to really focus on intake to try and reduce that aging. And we are making progress with this. So hopefully, as time goes on, we will see that drop. Because you could see that in the past, we were way up here in July and August, and that's when in October we started hitting on those backlog cases. And then as our numbers started to drop. So now, February, March, we see 2320 averaging, which is good, but we still need to bring that down to averaging at 10. That's where our goal is. Performance measures for investigation. These are all cases that we've investigated both internally and field investigation. As you can see, the threshold is 360. That's our target. For the most part, we are well below that target. You see an increase in February. My take on this is that once we start zeroing in on the intake, as we start to hit that 10-day mark for our intake cases, I think there's going to be a little bit of an uptake in our investigation time here on the cycle time 3. So I don't believe we're going to go above the threshold, but I do believe that we're going to average a little above that. So usually our average here is 188, but in the past we've had averages around 90, but I think it's going to increase a little bit more as we try and hit that intake of 10 days. Cycle time 4, this is all cases that were sent to the AG's office. Once those cases leave our office, we don't have a lot of control over that cycle time. So the goal, DCA's goal is at 540. Our average is 896. So I'm not sure what we can do to decrease that. I mean, because once we get most of these cases or all of these cases for the most part go out to field investigations as well. So those are, that aging is also incorporated into this cycle time. And then let's go to the final page. So there are currently 40 probation cases, of which 12 cases are told. During this period, 7 probationary cases were closed, 8 cases were opened. Total cost recovery ordered is currently $516,020.49. To date, $308,173.80 has been paid, leaving a balance of $207,847.69. So that's where we're at with probation. And any questions regarding the enforcement report?
Hey, Corey, this is Claudia. Any other trends, maybe that are not on this report, that you're seeing that maybe we should pay attention to?
Well, I think that one of the things that has impacted our aging, I think COVID has impacted some of the aging on this. And I think mostly probably in the field investigation, where, and I think COVID impacted all of our, processes, not just in DCA world, but in the world itself. So just, some of the holdups in some of the investigation process occurred in interviewing, trying to interview and locate, and then just adapting to how to do the investigations now into this new, reality that we're in. I think some of these cases were held up a little bit. And I don't know how to quantify that, but I do think that had impact on some of the aging. But that's pretty much, at this point, the only thing that I could see that's had impact on our enforcement.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Okay, do we have any other comments from board members? No? Any comments from members of the public with regard to the executive director's report?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment for the executive director's report, please click that Q&A icon at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. And I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access the Q&A panel and submit their requests. All right, it appears there are no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
All right, the Q&A panel is now closed.
All right, thank you. We will move on to agenda item number 9, discussion and possible action on pending legislation. We'll go back to Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Bahari. I apologize. I was having technical difficulties and I've had to readjust my location in the office. So
No problem.
I'm going to go over the pending legislation for the board and what we've been keeping an eye on. Before you have a list of all the bills that we're following. I'm going to go over a handful of the bills that we're keeping a closer eye on than the others. Terry Thorfinson, the board's assistant executive director, is going to assist me with this report, as she is our legislative expert in the office. So there will be times where I'm having her do some of the bills as well. So the first bill we're keeping an eye on is Assembly Bill 2. It's about regulations. So this bill, it would require the board on or before January 1st, 2023 to review our regulations and identify any regulations that are duplicative, overlapping, inconsistent, or out of date, and revise those regulations, and then report the regulations, the revisions to the legislature and the governor. Due to the amount of time this is going to take to kind of go through all of our regulations and figure out what's duplicative, what's overlapping and everything else. We've actually attached a fiscal impact to this because this is something that will increase our workload enough where we would need an additional staff member in the office to do that. And that's why we're keeping an eye on this because there is a fiscal impact associated with it. So this is one that we're keeping an eye on. It was introduced on December 7th, and it's currently, as of April 29th, 2021, it was referred to the Assembly Committee on Appropriations. So it is moving through the process, not necessarily at an expeditious rate, but it is moving through the process and something that we are keeping an eye on. The next bill we are, I want to talk about today is Assembly Bill 359. The title is Physicians and Surgeons, Licensure and Examinations. And this one I am going to have Terry Thorfinson speak on.
Thanks, Mark. Board members, this bill we're highlighting because there is some significant changes at the state level regarding the medical board and their use of their USMLE exams in terms of the policy of how many times somebody can take the exam. And I wanted to draw it to your attention because of what it's happening. It's a significant change, and there are different changes going on at the federal level with the exam national boards versus the state. And so I wanted, as a context, for you to be aware of that, even though right now it does not affect us. And the change basically is that the USMLE have the same problems with their physical and clinical examination as you heard with the NBMO OME suspension of the PE exam. And both boards basically, both national boards have basically the same policy for retaking exams and also going through this evaluation of how they're going to change exams. So in the backdrop of that context, the state in this bill is making a proposal that would apply only to the med board to increase the number of tries that somebody can retake any of the exam levels that are required from 4 retakes to 6. Okay, the national boards, in contrast, have a policy that currently allows the 6, but they are changing to 4. And the USMLE is changing to 4 on July 1, 2021. The NBMOE is changing July 1, 2022, going from 6 to 4. And in the call that I think Dr. Bahari and I were on with the USMLE, they cited that the change was in part based on data that they looked at, that 4 tries seems to be the sweet spot for success in trying to pass the exam, that the more tries, the pass rate drops, and that there was some correlation with risk for disciplinary action in a person's career. So the national boards are going from their 6 to 4. Now the state legislature, and this bill is saying they want, based on an emergency, and this is an urgency bill, which is different than most bills, which is if they get 2/3 of the vote of the legislature, it would go into effect immediately, as opposed to, well, the governor has to sign it, but it would go into effect immediately, not the usual waiting period of January 1, following the fall when the governor signs it. So the background in the bill says that there's an urgency with the pandemic, a shortage of physicians, and that this is a good way, increasing the number of tries is a good way to increase the supply of physicians. And from a policy perspective, and the reason I'm putting a fine point on this for board members to think about policy-wise if we're ever in this situation, is that the idea of increasing physician supply at the cost of public safety, which is what the standards that NOM and the USMLE are responsible for doing, evaluating and providing boards the kind of official conclusion, this physician is competent and ready to practice safely to the public. pitting public safety against convenience and increasing supply of physicians, I think, is a very dangerous trade-off. And at least for now, I want you to be aware that it's going on with the medical board. There is also a part of the bill that changes CME to allow for more practical skills, if you will, that a physician also has to learn to be able to be successful in the business, like office management, billing, things that are unrelated to patient care. And prior to this bill, there was kind of a strict focus for CME on just clinical care and competence, period. So this bill also changes that for some. Still, it would be included in the urgency clause, but it doesn't seem to rise to the level of urgency, but it would be included in that. So that's what I wanted to explain with the 359 to you. Again, right now the bill doesn't affect us other than the CME revisions, and all of the CME doesn't necessarily directly affect the board because all of the CME we don't credit the CME as a board. We rely on the AOA and AMA to accredit valid CME. So those bodies, national bodies, will be the ones that have to make this change, and we will continue to accept accredited CME based on that. Any questions?
Awesome, thank you, Terry. So the next bill we want to talk about is Assembly Bill 657. I'm going to have Terry kind of explain this bill as well.
Okay, thank you, Mark. This bill was a bill that did affect the board because it started to prohibit the type of contracts that we utilize to contract with expert reviewers. And basically, if the bill as written originally would have just put a work stoppage on all of our enforcement and our ability to contract with experts. And so I worked with the medical board's ledge staff, Aaron Bone, to contact the author, explain the issue, and provide the same language as the medical proposed. And the author accepted that proposal, which basically exempts all of the DCA boards and bureau from the bill. So it solves our problem of how their issue that they're wanting to create a registry for physicians was very much unrelated to our contracts. But with most bills, if you make them too broad and you don't narrow their scope, it can include unintended consequences. And our enforcement contracts, our expert review contracts, were part of that original impact. So I'm happy to say that the author did accept and make those amendments, so it's no longer a problem, but I wanted to raise it as something, just in case it changes. We always have to watch for this. Any questions on that particular bill?
Awesome, thank you, Terry. So the next bill is Assembly Bill 1278, and I'm also going to have Terry present this bill as well.
This is a bill for educational purposes. Doesn't really affect the board per se, but it does affect physicians. And so I am wanting to always try to alert the board about new requirements that are targeting physicians. And this one is a modification of an existing conflict of interest law. And what it does is require physicians now to do a number of things that were not required before. And it's related to taking anything of value that's assessed over $10 from a pharmaceutical company. Now this bill would require that the physician that takes anything of value from a pharmaceutical company and prescribes those pharmaceuticals to the patient, they must provide notice of that, both of the gift and then get a signed statement from the patient that they are acknowledging that receipt of that notice that would go into the medical file. And the physician is required to post on the CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services website. They have a database portal that all of the physicians that tracks basically pharmaceutical gifts to physicians, that they have to report all of their gifts that they received over $10 on that website. And then this bill goes farther to then require that physicians' offices have to post the link to that federal website and the fact whether they in fact take gifts from pharmaceutical companies. And that they're saying can be posted just like the notice to consumers requirement that gives, if you recall, that gives notice to consumers that their physician is licensed by Osteopathic Medical Board. So that is a big change, I think, for physicians. And so I just wanted to make people aware of that. It doesn't affect board operations at all, but it will be a big change for physicians depending on how they deal with pharmaceutical gifts. Any questions?
I'm so sorry. Where does this stand? You said it has a good chance of moving forward. I think I missed it.
Yeah, let me see. Where is it saying it right now is referred to Assembly on Appropriations? It doesn't have, doesn't look like it has a fiscal. So it has a good chance of passing. You know, in the end, if the opposition, I'm guessing from the profession, overcomes it, it may fail in the end, but you know, it's right now, it's not costing the state anything in terms of increasing this vigilance and reporting. The cost is really would be for the physician.
What about really quickly oversight? So is that going to be part of the enforcement if it moves forward for us?
Well, for us, we have quite, you know, honestly, our oversight is really based on complaints. So if we don't receive a complaint about this, then we may not ever see someone that is not in compliance. And with many other requirements like this, where we would tend to be able to look for enforcement would be when we have a case and we look in the medical records and we look to see, are there the required patient notices and sign-offs that are required? There's one, you know, for sexual misconduct cases. This would be a second one in terms of, you know, if there was a gift received by a pharmaceutical company, there would have to be a notice for that. But overall, it would be looking for a needle in a haystack to, you know, rove and have, you know, the board just doesn't have what do you call audit authority to audit like every single doctor. That would be the only way you could really have oversight. So, you know, the dilemma is in these kinds of legislation, it is trying to solve a problem that is perceived, which is, you know, doctors being unduly influenced potentially by gifts from pharmaceutical companies, not necessarily using the patient's best interest in mind. So they put this rule in place. Does it get, you know, is there a way to really monitor it? No, there isn't. There is case by case, but not as a general sphere for prevention.
All right, thank you so much. That was very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Terry, for presenting those bills. There's one more bill I want to go over. It's Senate Bill 48. The bill requires all general internists and family physicians to complete at least 4 hours of mandatory CME on the special care needs of patients with dementia. So I'm just bringing up this bill only because it will increase some workload with the board. However, we do anticipate that the additional workload can be absorbed within our existing resources. So we won't need to ask for more staff. But it's something I wanted to bring to your attention as it will increase some workload in the office. I know CMEs are a sensitive subject and kind of a big deal for us with all the changes we're trying to make at this point. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. So that concludes my legislative report. So unless you have any other questions, I will pass it back to Dr. Bahari.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Terry. Is there any public comment regarding this agenda item?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a public comment on this item, please click that Q&A icon at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. I'll go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access the Q&A panel and submit their requests. All right, seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
All right, the Q&A panel is now closed.
All right, no comment. Then we'll move on to our next agenda item, and that is discussion of possible approval of the guidelines for the recommendation of cannabis for medical purposes. And I'll pass this off to Andrew Moreno and Claudia Mercado, who have worked very hard on this report, and to go ahead and present.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll begin, and just as some background information, our subcommittee was formed back in January of 2020, and again, the members include myself and Claudia Mercado. As a starting point, we used the California Medical Board's own guidelines, which were adopted by that board back in April of 2018. I'll kind of now go into the structure of the guidelines. So we developed the guidelines with the following components, which we're going to ask the board to consider and or possibly provide any additional feedbacks or comments. Under the preamble section of the guidelines, we start off by stating that physicians who are licensed by this board who choose to recommend cannabis for medical purposes to their patients are not going to be subject to investigation or disciplinary action if they arrive at that decision in accordance with accepted standards of medical responsibility. We note that the board's guidelines are not intended to state the standard of care, and that we recognize that there may be deviations that may be appropriate. Where possible, we also list any applicable statutes. For example, we note California Business Code 2525.3, which states recommending medical cannabis to a patient for medical purposes without inappropriate prior examination, and a medical indication constitutes unprofessional conduct. Under the background section, we inform our licensees as to the legislative history and statutory language that recognizes the use of cannabis for medical purposes. Again, we cite California Health and Safety Code 1136.2, also known as the Compassionate Use Act. We then talk about the physician-patient relationship, and pursuant to California Business and Professions Code 2525.2, the statutory language reads that a physician shall not recommend cannabis for a medical purpose to a patient unless that physician is that patient's attending physician, which is a term of art. And then we also include in the guidelines to help any individual who is looking at those guidelines. We also include the statutory definition for what is an attending physician, and we also list what that statutory code is, Health and Safety 11362.7A. Within that section, we note that physicians are recommended to document that there is an appropriate physician-patient relationship that has been established prior to providing a recommendation for cannabis. We also note that and recommend that documenting that medical examination and collecting relevant clinical history is recommended prior to making that recommendation for cannabis as well. It's important to know that under Business and Professions Code 2525.3, it does state that recommending cannabis to a patient for medical purpose without an appropriate prior examination and without any medical indication does constitute unprofessional conduct. So within there, we're always instructing any individual who's interested in recommending cannabis that they need to demonstrate that physician-patient relationship and also conduct a medical evaluation with their patient prior to making that recommendation. We also discussed the importance of making that decision informed and a shared decision-making process. The decision to recommend cannabis should be a shared decision between the physician and the patient, and the physician should discuss the risks and the benefits of the use of cannabis with the patient. It should also specify the measurable goals under that decision making. They should also discuss measurable goals and objectives that will be used to evaluate that treatment progress, such as relief of pain and/or improved physical and psychosocial function. We also note in the guidelines, California Health and Safety Code 11362.5, which does list certain conditions which cannabis may be useful for, and we do cite those conditions, which are listed as cancer, anorexia, AIDS, chronic pain, glaucoma, arthritis, or migraine. I'm going to let Claudia now also intervene and say for part of this presentation.
This is the moderator. Claudia, if you are speaking, you are currently muted.
Okay, let me turn my phone off, my video. Sorry, there's a little lag. 1 second. Okay. All right, thank you for that. Let me start again. So just to follow up with where Andrew left off, we do recommend that there be an ongoing monitoring and treatment plan where the physician regularly assesses the patient's response to the use of cannabis and its patient's overall health and level of function. We also cited that this should be done through a consultation where, after review and consideration, the physician should decide if it's something that they want to engage in or if they want to seek additional help and refer them to other professionals. And we do reference the patient evaluation prior to recommending cannabis. The guidelines note which will seek feedback from the board whether a physician should consider patient history of present illness, social history, past medical and surgical history, alcohol and substance abuse history, family history with emphasis on addiction, psychotic disorder, or mental illness. So we know this is a situation that has to be taken with all necessary precautions, and there should be proper record keeping at all time so that we abide by the Business and Profession Code 2266. We also know that there might be some conflict of interest, so we did include the professional code section indicating those potential conflict of interest. And the final thing that we want to bring to your attention is the decision tree. We did not make any changes there. We are really looking for some feedback from the decisions from the board, and if we could collectively review that and come to an agreement and are making these suggestions based on what we presented to you on any changes that you might want to add to the decision tree. And Andrew, any final thoughts? Did I cover it all?
Yes, that's the overview of the guidelines. If the board has any comments or feedback, we'd be open to making any changes. If not, then we can adopt the guidelines as they are written. And I know the subcommittee would like to have this committee meet regularly when needed, so that if we do need to make updates in the future, or if there's any changes in the statute that may affect the guidelines, then we would be ready to do so.
Any other comments from board members? I just want to give Claudia and Andrew, a pat on the back for this. This is quite a thorough document, and I know you guys spent a lot of time working on this and put a lot of effort into it.
Thank you.
And the document just from legal counsel, can you maybe just tell us where we stand with this, with the guidelines? I know you also were part of helping us put this document together.
Sure, yes. As your president pointed out, the subcommittee did a great job. They did a lot of the heavy lifting, and I think the document is in fine form right now. At this point, it is dated for May 2021, should you decide to adopt it today. And after doing so, Mark, will make sure it gets on the website properly so that everybody else can access it, and maybe even do a interested parties email or get it out to any associations that might want to announce the adoption of it. And so the motion, should you want to adopt it today, would just be to move to, I don't have the official title in front of me, but the guidelines for the recommendation of cannabis for medical purposes. So the motion will be to adopt it as written, and to, at the same time, give the authority to make any non-substantive and technical changes to the document to the executive director. And then, as you stated, also, the subcommittee may meet from time to time as needed, and we don't need any motion for that. We don't need any direction from that. If the president chooses to change up the committee members in the future, he may do so, but that doesn't have to be done at a meeting either.
So do we have a motion to approve the guidelines as described by legal counsel?
Dr. Buhari, I just had a quick question.
Yes.
I know that within my particular organization, opiates can't be prescribed alongside cannabis. I'm just wondering, Claudia and Andrew, did you come across that? Like any guidance on other medications to avoid when prescribing this? Just want to get your thoughts on it.
In my research, no, I did not. I know that Claudia and I relied heavily on the statutory language under the Compassionate Use Act. We did kind of include, because we're not physicians, I didn't want to include or write something that I did not have the knowledge of. But we did include that the physician should take that time before recommending cannabis to do that evaluation with the patient before, looking at that patient's history and what has been already prescribed. But if you are aware that there are some concerns specifically with that type of medication that you listed, then that perhaps is something that we should include in there.
Yeah, I don't know what the other doctors think. Are you guys, do you guys have that same, I guess, policy? I don't know if you deal with, opiate narcotics and cannabis, but when we have patients on, chronic pain medicines and we do urine testing, if they test positive for cannabis, then we stop, the opiates. We basically say you can take one or the other. And this very well may be a local, policy, not necessarily the standard of care, statewide or nationally, but just wanted to bring that up too.
Yeah, and this is Claudia. And I think what we're trying to do with these guidelines is, make it so that those that do want to partake, there is some guidelines, and the standard of care and all the business codes and ethics are there in terms of, what's best for the public. But we also included, some concerns that the physicians should bring up with their patients, like, I don't have those. I think there's like a chronic cannabis, something that can happen if you just do too much of it. So we also wanted to address that there's some concerns around cannabis, but we did not address the opiate concern because from the research I've done, I've actually have a lot of anecdotal testimony of patients saying that they use cannabis as a way to get out of opiates. So I think, we have to protect the public, but it's also our duty to give the public options for their own health and well-being.
I'm not an opiate prescriber, but I think as long as it was part of the treatment plan and it's well laid out, it's probably reasonable between the physician and patient, but I don't know what the local regulations are.
I'm wondering if that's I mean, I'm wondering, if we adopt the guidelines, if we make this a public, like announcement, and then we get feedback, or have we asked if there's any feedback from the public at this time,
That's what we're about to do.
just to see kind of where we stand?
Okay, so we can ask for public comment. I suppose. I don't know if public comment is supposed to be asked for this, Terry, or is Sabina still on, or did she log off? There she is.
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely. Public comment is always welcome. And if you do adopt this today and the board sends it out or posts it, they end up getting some comments and some people who are interested in helping out and providing some input, that would be great. I mean, it can be a living document and it can evolve as needed, and that way the subcommittee can take those comments back and work on it, or till they meet again.
Okay.
I
So
have a
should we
quick
make?
question. I have a quick
Go
question.
ahead. Or
Are there any clinical trials, studies of any sort that puts together cannabis use and pharmaceutical, what do you call it, narcotics or whatever it's called, that shows the correlation between the dangers and all that stuff? Is there anywhere we can find the research and the clinical trials where we can have a better informed report?
Well, right now things are limited in terms of clinical trials, because we have to kind of make it okay for people to engage with cannabis. So at a national level, that's happening. But there's only a few that can actually do any research with cannabis, and I think this is us kind of moving that towards that direction, adopting guidelines, so then things start to kind of flow and it becomes more of a norm to engage with cannabis, and then we can do more studies. That's how I see it. That's my perspective.
Okay. Yeah, as long as it can be a living document, evolve with and keeps growing, I'm okay with it, I think.
Yeah, I see what you guys are saying. That this looks fine, but I think in the future, just I would probably include the hyperemesis syndrome that you kind of alluded to. That can be a big problem if you overdo it with the cannabis. Things to kind of watch out for, because I see that a lot. Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, where you just have a lot of nausea in the morning, or always vomiting, all these symptoms, and it's really due to the cannabis.
And just one more point, Andrew, maybe you want to step into and maybe add some notes. But when we were diving into the guidelines, these guidelines were adopted by the Medical Board of California a few years back, I think 2018. So, complete transparency, since I'm in the industry and I know a little bit more about the way things are manufactured, part of our guidelines does include, just the conversations around cannabis. We are asking the physicians to be more engaged and more educated. So, being able to talk to your clients or your patients about your cannabis, is what kind of cannabis you're using, how it's extracted, so that we have a bigger understanding of what the conversation is really about. Does that make sense? So instead of just saying, you're taking cannabis, okay, well, are you vaping something into your lungs that potentially was extracted with butane, versus are you, dipping cannabis flower in your tea and drinking warm water? So I think that's kind of where we're trying to go to. But for now, we just want the foundation so that a physician can even engage. Is that correct, Andrew? Right? That's
my understanding as well, that this is just to provide an introductory framework, broadly written, to give practitioners some guidelines, which lets them know that if they choose to recommend cannabis, that they're following state statutes, and that our board is not going to discipline them for prescribing or for recommending cannabis, provided that they follow those guidelines and the statutes that we listed within the guidelines.
I think that's about it.
All right, I think that's very thorough. Is it the right time to make a motion?
You can do the motion now. You can open for public comment first. You may.
Why don't we
choose-
just go ahead and open for public comment then, and see if anyone wants to comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click that Q&A icon at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. I'll go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access the Q&A panel and submit their requests. All right, this is the moderator, and it looks like there are no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, please.
All right, the Q&A panel is now closed.
All right, can we make a motion to pass the guidelines as described by council earlier?
I'll make a motion. Oh,
Yeah,
go ahead.
no, sorry, Claudia, it was Sabina. I was just gonna encourage Dr. Patel to send over information to the subcommittee members for their use in the future for the next update, or for them to be looking into in the meantime. We had a motion by Claudia. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, having been moved and seconded, we will have Machiko do a roll call vote.
All right. Gora Damian,
Aye.
Dr. Buhari,
Aye. Aye.
Dr. Jensen, Dr. Jensen,
Aye.
Claudia Mercado,
Aye.
Andrew Marino,
Aye.
Dr. Patel.
Aye.
Motion carried. And then who seconded the motion?
I did.
I'm sorry, I think Gore.
No.
Andrew Moreno seconded.
Oh, Andrew, sorry.
Andrew.
I am so sorry. I'm looking down and
Have one voice at a time. If you have something to say, either raise your hand or. And this is also a special time.
Okay, so having that that motion is carried, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item 11 on our agenda. Anyways, okay, so this is future agenda items. Any discussion by the board?
I would like to, this is Claudia, maybe just put a recap of our strategic plan for the board, kind of where we are with that.
I think Mark is writing down as we speak.
And then I have one more thing. I was just curious to see if there's any way that we can maybe publish some data around the demographics of the new incoming physicians and or currents just for the state of California. I know there's a lot of conversations around corporate boards having representation, and it'd be good for us to maybe do a report of where our physicians stand in terms of diversity.
Are there any other suggestions for future agenda items? Dr. Jensen, were you saying something? Oh, okay. Any public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click that Q&A icon at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. I'll go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access the Q&A panel and submit their requests. All right, seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
All right, Q&A panel is now closed.
All right, thank you, and no comments. So we will go on to the last agenda item, well, almost the last one, but that's future meeting dates. Any discussion from the board? Mark, what are our next dates?
We currently have our next meeting on September 23rd, 2021 as a teleconference meeting, which I anticipate it will still be a teleconference unless we hear different in terms of opening up the state for travel to these meetings. But that's what we have so far, September 23rd. And I anticipate probably at some point next year, we'll go to in-person meeting updates for next year. We can do that now.
Okay, very good. Anybody else want to say anything about the dates? We're good?
Would we like to put a January date on the calendar? That way we can get
Sure.
something set for next year.
Any suggestions?
This is Andrew. Just a quick question. Are we going to assume that our next meeting in September is going to be through WebEx as well?
I think that's probably we'll keep it as a teleconference as of right now.
Okay.
Yeah, Andrew, I anticipate September will be a teleconference as well, only because of the uncertainty, and then actually trying to find a location at last minute might be rough as well.
Okay.
So the dates available, I would assume we would want to go later in the month as opposed to the first week of January. So January 13th, 20th, or 27th of 2022.
20th is good for me.
20th sounds fine. Hey, everybody. So if no one has any objections, I think January 20th is reasonable.
Okay. Do we want one more date, or do we want to stay with January?
Let's just hang on to January, I think, because we don't know what the world is going to look like, and we can probably come up with some at the September meeting.
Okay.
Hi, this is Mark Ito again. So should we assume that it's going to be a teleconference unless we hear different, and then we'll kind of reshuffle?
I think that's a safe way to go. Yeah.
Okay.
And I can, in the meantime, since we normally do the January meeting in Sacramento, I can put the hearing room on the calendar just in case, but we'll go from there. So yeah.
Okay. Great. All right. Then the last agenda item is going to be moved to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you so much.
Is that good for everybody?
Yeah, great meeting. Appreciate
All right.
it.
All right. It was
Thanks,
a busy
everyone.
meeting. Appreciate everybody being involved. It's good to see all of you again.
You too.
You guys.
Everyone take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Take care.
All right, this is the moderator, and this concludes the Osteopathic Medical Board meeting. I will end the WebEx session now.
Thank you.